So here's where the fun begins. We're going to start building out the UI, the user interface of our final Instagram clone. Now this isn't going to have any of the functionality, but it's going to have the basic structure and all of the styles of our application. We're going to see how to take the Instagram web app, how to take all of the things that it includes, the visual appearance of it, and all of its individual pages, and see how to break that into components to make into our own React application. So we see the completed version of this first step right now, and at this point we're looking at the feed page as if we have had an authenticated user interacting with the site. We can see a feed of posts, a list of posts, and we see a number of suggestions embedded within that list so that users can maybe follow one of these. Again, we're just using the same user here since we're just going to be using dummy data since we don't have any real data to work with yet. We'll add that in a later step. We have the currently authenticated user here on the right above another list of users that we might want to follow. And our feed continues until we hit the bottom, in which case we see a loading spinner and we load more posts. And with each one of these posts, we're going to add the ability to like it, to save it, and to see the entire caption. We can expand the caption. Now if we want to look at all the comments, we can see them here. We'll be able to see them here. Right now we don't have any. And we'll actually be able to add individual comments ourselves. Other users will be able to comment on our posts. We can see more things to do to interact with this post by hitting the More button, and see all these options right there. When we select another post within this grid, when we're on an individual post page, we see kind of a loading skeleton here, which is nice as our post is being loaded, and we can interact with it in the same way. We can exit out of this modal, and we can go to the Explore page here, where again we see more suggestions, which are going to add with real data, more posts to explore, which will ultimately be other users' posts. And then up at the top, we're going to have a list of notifications, say for people that have followed us or liked one of our photos. We'll be able to check those out as well as check out the user that did so. We can see that user's individual profile page. And if that user is us, we're going to see this Edit Profile button. So we'll have the ability to edit our profile. We'll see information, meta information about ourselves or that other user, the number of posts that they've created, the number of followers that they have, and the number of people that they're following, as well as some personal info about them, the posts that they've created, posts that they've saved. This will just be for the currently authenticated user. You won't be able to see other users' saved posts. And again, you see more options here. When you click on the gear button, you can sign out, for example, and you can hit this Edit Profile button and you can edit information about yourself if you're the currently authenticated user and do things like change your avatar, for example. So that just covers some of what this final user interface consists of. You can see this little tooltip that tells users about the notifications that they've been receiving. And right now we're going to see how to take the actual Instagram app and turn it into all of this. As you can see, it looks identical to the actual Instagram application. So it's going to be a lot of fun working with all this. Now, note one thing before we begin. We want to start working with all of the actual assets that we need to make the interface. So we're going to need some icons that come from Instagram. We're going to need some images. We're going to need, for example, the favicon. We're going to need a number of things necessary for making this app look exactly like the final Instagram web app, the deployed Instagram web app. So to do that, we're going to use a starting repository. We're going to use a starting repo that I've set up for you that includes all the assets and images and files and styles that we need in order to build this out very quickly, where we can start focusing on what's most important, the actual operation of this app and how to get it working exactly like the Instagram app and not focus excessively on the styling of it, which if we were to focus entirely on the styling would probably take twice as much time. So to get started, we're going to head to the following address. We're going to go to github.com/codeartistry.io/, Instagram-React12. This is where our starting repo lives. And we'll want to hit the clone or download button. You can use git clone to bring it in, but I'd recommend downloading it as a zip file. So once that's brought in, we're going to head to our downloads folder. I'm personally going to bring this to my desktop. I'll double click on it to unzip it. I'm going to just rename this from Instagram React 12 Master to just Instagram React 12, like that. And then we can open this in our code editor. Now the first thing that we'll do is we'll just install all of our dependencies. So just in our terminal, we'll run npm i. Now the first thing that we're going to do once we have all of our dependencies installed is we're going to take this README file right here and we're going to make some notes. This is an important step in cloning the app that we want to recreate, Instagram in this case. We want to analyze it. We want to look at all of its parts and see how we're going to make it. We're going to recreate each part, turn them into components and pages, and how we're going to make them function. So right now we're going to look at the basic structure of everything. We're not going to see how each part works exactly, but we're just going to see the appearance of it, the structure, and how we want to kind of lay everything out. And that includes the different routes, the different pages that we go to. Say when we navigate to a profile page, where does that take us? What route does that take us to? Or when we click on this button right here in the nav bar, where does that take us to? So all of these are important components, important elements about making our own version of Instagram. Now let's kind of work backwards. Let's start as an authenticated user, as if we're authenticated. And right now I'm signed in under my account. And let's just take a look at these individual pieces that are a part of each of these routes that we're looking at. So right now we're looking at the home route or the root route, just /. So we'll make a note of that. Let's just make a section here called routes. So I just made a header here with a couple of hash marks. This is just a convention of the markdown syntax. So let's make this routes header. And the first route that we're going to start with is the root route, just /. And I'll also supply a name for it. Let's just call this root route, when we're authenticated, the feed page. And let's think about what our feed page is going to consist of. Well, first of all, it's going to consist of this nav bar up at the top. Now note that there are going to be a number of components that we have that are shared across our pages. Note that when we go to the Explore page, that the nav bar is up there as well. So this is going to be a kind of shared component. So let's also make a section for shared components. And one of them is going to be our nav bar. But again, let's go back to our home page, to our feed page, I should say. What does that consist of? Well, we see a list of posts, this long list of posts, this infinite scroll of them. So we can say for our feed page, it's going to consist of first a feed post component. Note that I like to, for a given route that I've named, I like to prepend its name with the page that we're on. So if this component's going to live on the feed page, we want to prepend it with the page's name, feed post. We also mentioned or saw that when our list of posts was loading, we saw that there was this loading skeleton. So we might want to call that our feed post skeleton. That'll be a separate component. And here on the right-hand side, we noted this whole sidebar area where we have the currently authenticated user that consists of their avatar and username and name, and then also a number of suggestions for them, suggestions of users to follow. So this will be another component here. We'll have a component called feed side suggestions. And when we scroll down, we noted that after the second post, after the second feed post, there was this list of suggestions, some more suggested users for us to follow that really kind of mirrored this side area. Well, this again is another shared component. If we go to the Explore page and we see this Discover People area up at the top, we see it's largely the same. It's just a little bit larger. It has 5 cards that we see at a time, really 4.5 that we see in a time as compared to 3. So this is another shared component. And we'll call this shared component Follow Suggestions. Another one that I want to make note of is this kind of user card, what I'm going to call a user card that consists of an avatar and username and name. You can see that it's repeated here within this Follow Suggestions list. So we'll make that another shared component. Additionally, there is this Follow button here on the right-hand side after the user card. So this is a separate entity, so we might as well make this a component. We see it's mirrored here in our suggestions, our Follow Suggestions component. So to make this reusable, we also want to make this a shared component. We'll call this just a Follow button. And one last component to note. I know it seems like there's a whole lot of stuff here for a very simple page, what looks like a very simple page. And this isn't an exact science, it's just how I would break it down. As the needs of the application change, it's natural for the names of components to change, or for you to add additional components or remove them, to reorganize them. So note that this isn't exact, it's just my solution to this particular problem. One additional component, one additional shared component is this loading screen. You see this loading screen very briefly when we refresh the page before we actually load the post, before we actually see the feed page. This is another shared component which we might want to call a loading screen, where we see the Instagram logo in the middle. So that about does it for our feed page. Let's move on to the next one. We just want to hit this compass button here in the navigation. It'll be taken to this Explore route, a route that ends in the path /explore. So let's include that after the feed page entry that we have here. So this will be /explore, and we'll call this the Explore page. So what is this going to consist of? Well, we already know that we're going to have this area here that's going to use our Follow Suggestions component, because it's essentially the same thing as what we saw on the feed page, but we're going to make it slightly different. It has a slightly different title here, and it's a little bit larger, so we're going to make it its own component. So we'll make another components section, and we're going to call this Explore Suggestions. Again, we're prepending the name of the component with the page that it's being used on, that it's specific to. And then at the bottom, this page really just consists of 2 parts. Again, it has this grid area from a number of different users that we can explore, and when we hover over them, you can see this overlay that tells us how many likes and how many comments it has. That's going to be another component, and this is going to be called the Explore Grid. Now, what's interesting is that when we click on one of these posts to see, we want to see more information about it. If we take a look at the route, we see that it's changed. It's not Explore anymore, it's /p/ this unique ID. So this is the post's ID, since we're looking at individual posts, and we're seeing it within this modal. So we technically have a new route here, a new page here. So we want to add another section for the post page. So it's going to begin with the P that we mentioned, / and then we're going to have a unique post ID. So this will be our post page. So the first component that this is going to consist of is going to be a post component. Just a kind of different version of our feed post, but with a lot of similar elements. If we were to go back and look at our feed post, we could click on the More button, and we see this kind of options dialog, which we've seen before. Some different options for interacting with this post. And we see, if we click on an individual, explore grid post, if we see an individual post here in this view, if we click on the More button, we see basically the same thing. So this is another instance of a shared component. So we're going to make a component called an options dialog. So if we refresh this page, we see our loading screen again. But what's interesting here is that we're not within the modal any longer. We're taken to this separate page where we see the post component within the page. And then at the bottom, we see some additional posts from that same user. So this is going to be another component here. We really have one component here with post. We have another for the post modal. So I have post and post modal. And then we have an area where we can see more posts from a given user. So we're going to call this more posts from user. And note once again, you might not be able to see it here, but if we were to click on a grid item, we see that loading skeleton. So we're going to have not only a post, but we're going to have a post skeleton. So we've covered 3 pages so far. If we click on this heart icon up here, we see a loading spinner, and then we see all of our notifications. So this doesn't take us to a separate route, but we still want to make note of this, the components that we have here. So we're not going to call this a page, but we're just going to call this notifications. And it's going to consist of the following components. We're going to have this entire list. So this entire list will be a component. I'll actually make this notification. And the component is going to be called notification list. And it's going to consist of individual notifications. But what's displayed here, what we're toggling, is this kind of tooltip. So it might be kind of hard to grasp right now, but we're going to have the list itself, the contents of this tooltip, and then the tooltip itself. So we're going to have both a notification list and a notification tooltip. Then moving on, we're going to have an individual profile page. It's either going to be a page for us, where we can edit our profile, or it's going to be someone else's page. It's going to look the same regardless. We're just going to change what users can do. So we're going to have an individual profile page, and that's going to be according to their username here. So we're going to call this the profile page, but it's going to be their username. And for us, it's just going to consist of one component. We might be able to break this into a separate header component where we have all of this meta information about the user. But for us, and in terms of how I've created things, we're just going to have a kind of tabs area here. So this is going to live within the profile page itself, and this is going to be a separate component underneath called profile tabs. Where, as we mentioned, we can toggle different tabs, say the posts they've made and the posts that a user has saved, that we've saved. Then we can go to edit our profile, and if we look at that route, it's /accounts/edit. So we want to save that. This will be the edit profile page. And this once again is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to have any separate components. It's all going to kind of live within the edit profile page, but we are going to have one shared component that's not going to be obvious exactly. That's going to be shared between both the profile page and the edit profile page, and that is this profile picture you see right here. And we've been looking at things up until this point in an authenticated view. So we've been authenticated and looking at all of the available pages that we can navigate through. But if we're not authenticated, we're going to see some different pages that we haven't seen up until this point. So if we log out, we'll see this splash screen when we go to Instagram.com, and that includes this kind of slideshow of images. But here on the right-hand side, it actually gives us something to log in with. And that's actually what we see when we're taken to the login page, this area where we can log into our account. And you see that this is on the route accounts/login. So we're going to make that a separate page as well. And we're going to call this the login page. And just like edit profile, it's going to have everything exist within here, within the page itself. We're not going to have separate components. And then if we click on the area at the bottom asking us whether we have an account, if we hit the sign up link, we're going to be taken to the page, or to the route accounts/email sign up. So that'll be another page. And this logically is going to be the sign up page. And it's going to be just like the login page. It's going to be very simple. We don't need to have any shareable or reusable components here. And then finally, if we go to a page that does not exist, we're going to be taken to this not found page, telling us, sorry, this page isn't available, asking us to go back to Instagram. So this is going to be on a kind of catch-all route when one of these routes isn't met, and this is going to be the not found page. But despite the fact that the page isn't found, note that we still have a header up at the top. We have this kind of minimalistic header, and this is going to be provided due to the fact that we're adding a kind of layout component to each page, to basically every page that we have, every page that we've looked at. So this is another shared component that we're going to include throughout our app. We're going to have a layout component, and it's really going to be giving each page a lot of structure, primarily a nav bar up at the top of some sort. And then additionally, if you note the header, you can see that it echoes what we see on the page. We have some metadata telling the user that the page isn't found, page not found. And the way that we're going to edit the header or meta information about the site is through a special SEO, a shared SEO component. So through all of this analysis, we've gotten a sense of the basic structure of Instagram and how we're going to convert this into our own component tree. And now that we've done all of this work, we can really understand all of the starting files that we have here within Source that I've included for you. We have two common folders, components and pages. And we understand how everything works because we've broken down everything into the individual routes or pages here. If we look into pages, we see all of our listed pages. Note that they all are lowercase. They're not like the JavaScript files, the convention that we use for component JavaScript files. They're lowercase, and we separate individual words with hyphens. All of these pages are going to correspond to routes when we set up our routes. And when we go into the components folder, we'll see that the subfolders that each of our components are in correspond to those pages. So to see what components are going to be used on the Explore page, we just look at the folder named Explore. And there we see Explore Grid and Explore Suggestions, just like we have here. For feed, we see feed post skeleton, and feed side suggestions. Notification, for notification, we see notification list and notification tooltip, etc. So now we really understand the file structure that we have here very well. We understand Instagram and how things are built out and how that's going to translate to our particular application. And we know immediately how to start working with all of these individual files. We have a kind of mental model for working with all of these files. And note that when we go to any one of these pages, say we go to the Explore page here, we see that we just have a simple React component, and the same is the case for the components that we have in our components folder. We have a very basic component, where as you can see, I've already got the styles, the individual styles that a component needs. I've already set that up for you, so you don't have to be concerned about the name of the component, where to get the styles from, or whether it needs styles, etc. So this just eliminates a lot of tedious work that we'd have to spend a lot of time on otherwise. But note that these are completely empty, including the app component that we have here. But right now I just want to navigate around the folders that we have outside of components and pages. So we have a theme.js file. Once again, we're using Material UI. So we've set up a material theme. We've created a theme here, and it includes some special settings, say for the typography, the text. I've got a palette here that includes all of the default, the stock Instagram colors. And we've also got this overrides area, which kind of manually manipulates some of these elements, these Material UI components, and just modifies them, just tweaks them a little bit. And you don't have to focus on this too much, but it just changes the default settings a little bit to make it look much more like the Instagram app appearance. But you can take a look at this if you like. When we go into index.js, we'll see that we're using the theme here with the Material UI theme provider. We're using the CSS baseline component to provide some baseline styles. So that accounts for theme, and the styles file is where we're getting all of the individual component and page styles. And they're all named very logically. So for the feed page, we're using the hook use feed page styles. For the explore suggestions component, we're using explore suggestion styles, etc. Again, you can take a look at all of the styles here if you want. We have an individual icons file that includes all of the Instagram specific icons. They're all SVG icons, and I've just converted them into React components. So they're going to be really easy to use. We can just use them like normal components. In this data file, I've included some default data, and this mirrors the structure pretty closely of the data that we're going to have within our final app. But you'll see here that for our default user, we don't have any specific name. It just uses my personal profile image here from Instagram. You can swap this out with whatever you like. I've commented out the default profile image that you're given from Instagram when you sign up. You can use that if you like. So we have a default user. If we scroll down, we have a default post. You can see all of its individual properties. We also have some notifications and the current user. So this is going to make providing dummy data a lot easier within our app. We've already taken a look at the app component. I've already mentioned the app component. It's just a bare bones React component. And if we go into images, these are just the basic images that we're going to be using for our app. Simple media files like the logo, the icon sheet, all of the icons that Instagram uses is taken from this, what's known as a sprite sheet. So we have a couple of sprite sheets here. We have some Facebook logos, pretty simple. And then finally, we have this now.json file. Now this is specific to the deployment service that we're going to be using to deploy our application. And we're going to become familiar with using now in order to deploy our app. We're going to deploy it once we're done building the user interface. So we're not going to have to wait until we're done. We're going to deploy it right away, and we're going to have a good understanding of what all of this does right here, all of this specific information that's used to tell now how it's going to deploy our React app so that it works. So now that we have a decent understanding of how everything's laid out in Instagram and how it's going to be converted to our React app that we're going to be making, let's actually dive in and start building out our individual pages and components.